Hello YouTube Pipers, Double O Pipe here, aka Rick. Got another cigar. La Roma de Cuba. Handmade and imported. Got that pretty little ribbon on the bottom. I'm gonna slip that off. If it'll slip off. Cut a little opening here at the end. Didn't want to cut too good. I always see people do that, but I don't smell anything. Let's see if my blowtorch works. Nope, not working. Well, I guess I'm quiet here. I don't know why I'm quiet. This is something new for me, and I'm trying to get my bearings on it. I don't know if I'm going to be doing this after I finish these anymore. I'm thinking I enjoy the pipe more than I do these. Plus, my blowtorch doesn't work. Son of a gun. Worked yesterday. Sunday, I hope everybody's having a good day. I found some blues on YouTube that I was listening to. Enjoyed that. Lost letters from the war from the blues community. That was a good half hour there. And I've been listening to trumpet players. Not so crazy about this one. A little stronger than I like. And whatever the flavors are coming through, I'm not too keen on those either. I was thinking about a friend of mine who died recently. His name was George. We were pretty good friends back in high school. Didn't see each other too much after high school. He joined the Merchant Marine, I believe, after high school. Then he went in the Navy, and he went to Vietnam. He was on one of those boats that went up the Delta that you saw in the beginning of Apocalypse Now. He came home, he had a Viet Cong flag that he had in his closet after he came back. He didn't talk much about his experiences. I don't. It's like any other war veteran. They don't like to talk about what they've been through and seen. But this little occurrence happened when we were still in high school and young and innocent and full of grits. Or is that vinegar and grits? I don't know. I was dating this girl. I was in 10th grade. He was in 10th grade too. She was a senior. And she asked me to take her to the junior senior, which is the big dance for both the juniors and the seniors. And I said, I don't think I want to do that, because you'll be out of place. I'll be out of place, because I don't know your friends. They're all seniors. And I'm a 10th grader. I said, you'll be ashamed of me anyway, being a 10th grader and you a senior. I said, I really don't want to do that, but I'll take you somewhere and we can have a nice evening. Well, I went back and talked to her a couple of days after that and reminded her that we were going to go out somewhere to eat and have a nice evening. And she said, Rick, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to the dance. I said, well, I told you I don't want to go to the dance. I would just feel completely out of place. And I think you'd be embarrassed too. And she said, well, my counselor got me a date with a cadet, a Citadel cadet. Do what? Yeah, I'm going to the dance with a cadet. I said, why you want to do that? She said, because this is my junior senior. And I want to go. It's the last one I'll ever have. I said, yeah, but with a cadet? And she said, he's a real nice guy and I'm going with him. I was an asshole. Let's put it that way back in those days. I started yelling and fussing. I'm surprised her parents didn't come out there and kick me out of the house. I said, well, you go on. Go with your cadet. I'm leaving. I started toward the door and she was crying. She said, no, don't do that. I want to talk to you. I said, I'm leaving. You go to that junior senior. You have a good time with your cadet. Citadel's here in town. I don't know if y'all are familiar with it. It's the military school. It used to be of the Confederacy. Continued on as a school. And we at the high school didn't like Citadel cadets. But anyway, I slammed her front door when I left, kind of half expecting her to come through and run after me. Didn't happen, so I ran and got in my car, slammed my car door, cranked up the ignition, cranked up the engine, put it in first and squealed around that corner. I think I must have been on 2 wheels because I had it floored and I had it to turn to the left, right off the front of her yard. And what squealing you can get with a Corvair, I don't know. But I got a little bit of rubber on the road, might have been about that much. And I just flailing with the wheel, trying to get it back on all fours and down the road straight. And I went sailing through a stop sign, didn't stop. Thank goodness there was no traffic on the road. I was ticked. And for a young teenager to be ticked, it's not good because they're stupid. Well, I took another left and I tore up the street and I slammed on brakes in front of George's house. Came to a stop, kicking up sand and grass. I know his parents weren't too happy with that when they saw those tracks in their yard. And George came out the door and said, "What's the matter with you?" And I explained to him what happened about my girl's dating a cadet. And he said, "Well, I told you not to date her. She's too old for you." And I said, "I know, but I'm in love." He said, "Yeah, I can tell." He said, "What's up? You want to come in, but we're eating. You'll have to sit in the front." I said, "No, I came by to see if you want to take a trip." He said, "Where to?" I said, "I want to go to St. Augustine." He said, "Well, how you going to do that?" I said, "I'm going to drive." He said, you're gonna be able to take that car?" I said, "Yeah, why wouldn't I?" He said, "Well, your parents, number one, they're not going to let you take the car." I said, "You let me worry about that. You want to go?" He said, "Yeah, I'll go with you. I got nothing to do this weekend." So I said, "Okay, I'll be back in 30 minutes. He said, "You sure you're going to be able to do this?" I said, "I'll be back." I came home, went straight back to my room or I grabbed a paper bag before I went back to my room, started throwing clothes in it. My mother came in and said, "What's up? What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to Florida." She said, "How you going to do that?" I said, "I'm going to drive." She said, "I think you better talk to your dad about that first." I said, "Okay." I was beyond logical thinking because excuse me, my dad, I don't know how to explain my dad. He was really a good man, and he looked at me and he kind of understood things that were happening with me, and sometimes he would go along with it and sometimes he wouldn't, depending on how he felt about my being able to learn something from the experience. So I said, "Dad, I want to go to Florida. Can I borrow the car?" And he looked at me for a long time. He said, "You think you'll be able to drive that far okay?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Can you do it without hurting your car, being responsible for your mother's car?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, son, but you take care of your mother's car and you be safe." Now, inside of me, I'm going, "What the hell?" But I said, "Thank you, Dad. I need this." And he said, "I can almost tell. You be careful, son." So I got my bag and I went out, got in the car, told my mom bye, kissed her. I think she was as surprised as I was that Dad said okay about that because you never knew about my dad. He was very smart in how to handle this child of his. So I went out and got in the car and drove to George's house and said, "You ready?" As he was climbing in the passenger seat, he said, "Yeah, let's go." So I tore off around the corner. I said, "We're heading south." So we went zooming down the road, going to St. Augustine, Florida. The reason I wanted to go to St. Augustine is because there was a girl down there that had moved about 6 months prior to this incident, and she and I had kind of had a thing going, and then she had to leave. We had a real pretty good connection, and she was a pretty girl, and I liked her a lot. And that was the reason I wanted to go to St. Augustine, was to see her again, see how she was, and see if that connection was still there. Well, we got halfway through Georgia when we hit this storm. It was like a hurricane. It may have been a hurricane because we weren't paying much attention since it wasn't heading our way. And we drove through all of that. Sometimes it was hard to keep that Corvair on the road because it was really blustering winds and hard rain and lightning and thunder. I mean, it was one of those classic storms whenever you think something's going to happen. And early in the morning, we got to St. Augustine and pulled up into one of the rest areas. And we watched the clouds so dark on the horizon that we had come through. And the sun was coming up, and the colors that went through the clouds and the sky, it was something neither George nor I had seen. I said, "That's beautiful, George. What you think?" He said, "I've never ever seen anything like this. So many colors in the sky." I said, "It's gorgeous." So while we were looking at it, I felt kind of hungry. I said, let's go get some breakfast?" He said, "Yeah, where you want to go?" I said, "Let's go up the street and see if we can find something." He said, "Okay." So I drove us up the street and we saw a little all-night cafe. We pulled up, went inside and sat down at one of the booths. Pretty little waitress came over and caught George's eye. And she kind of liked him too. You could tell by the way she was looking at him. And he started talking to her, and we ordered what we wanted. She brought it, and he was talking to her again as she brought the stuff, and watched her as she walked off, and she kind of turned around and looked at him. We ate our breakfast, and she came over with the check, and he said, "Why don't you go call whoever it was you wanted to call, and I'll talk to this young lady and see if maybe we can do a double." I said, "That sounds good." So I walked over to the phone booth, dropped a dime in, dialed her number, said hello, and she said hello. I said, "Hey, how you doing? We're here." She said, "You're here?" And I could hear that trepidation in her voice. I said, "Yeah, we're here. I came to see you." She said, "Well, Ricky, I called your house and your mother said you'd already gone. I tried to stop you." I said, "What do you mean you tried to stop me?" She said, "I've been gone for a long time. I met somebody down here." I said, "I thought we had a connection though. And I wanted to revive that connection." She said, "We did have a connection, but I knew I wasn't coming back up there, and I didn't think you'd be coming down here. I met somebody. We've been dating. We're steady." I said, "You mean you don't want to get together?" And she said, "I can't." And I thought to myself, why the hell didn't you tell me that? Anyway, so I said, "All right, I wish you a good life." And I hung up the phone. I walked over to the table. George was over there, had the girl's hand in his hand, and he was looking up here moon-faced, and she was looking down at him moon-eyed. And I said, "I'm leaving." He said, "What? What? What do you mean you're leaving?" I said, "If you want to go, let's go, but I'm leaving." He said, "But," and I said, "I'm leaving." So I left, and I went and got in the car. He came slowly walking out, looking at the girl through the window. And she was looking at him, and she looked over at me and just cussed him. And he got in the car, and he said, "What happened?" I explained it to him, and he said, "Well, I'll be. So what are we going to do now? Where are we going now?" I said, "We're going west, young man. We're going west." So he said, "All right, you're driving." This was before the I-10 had been finished and across the Florida up through the Panhandle. We had a lot of back roads and side roads, and we went across the portions of the interstate that had been finished, and we got to a little town called Milton. And he said, hey, there's a Rexall over there. Let's go over there. I want to get a camera and some film. I said, okay. I guess we need to take some pictures of what we're doing, don't we? He said, yeah. So we stopped in front of the Rexall. There was a pretty little girl in there in a checkered dress, black and white checks. And he went straight over to that counter. She was over at the film counter. And he started talking to this girl, and she was all smiles and looking at him like, boy, I want to go out with him. And George was thinking, boy, I want to take this girl out. And I just looked around the store a little bit while he got his film and camera. I wasn't thinking of anything about it because I didn't want to stop in Milton. But he was over there. He was making plans again. He was always making plans with the girls. So I got over there. I said, you got your film and your camera? He said, yeah, but I wanted to talk to. I said, well, I'm leaving. He looked at me and I could hear him under his breath. You sorry son. And he told her, bye. He wished he could stay, but he had to ride with me. So we drove on and got to Pensacola, and we went to Pensacola Beach, and we went down to, I can't remember the name of that place, but it was the fort that they held Geronimo in for a while. And we went down there and took some pictures and said, well, we better go get something to eat and find a place to stay. And we both agreed to that. And we ate, slept in a motel. And the next morning he said, well, what you want to do now? I said, I don't know. Let's go up north. He said, up north like where? And I said, well, we could go to Maggie Valley. Have you ever been there? He said, no, but I've heard about it. And I said, yeah, they've got this ghost town up on top of a mountain. My parents went there and took me when I was little, and I liked it. He said, that sounds like fun. Let's do that. So we got in the car and we started heading north up to Maggie Valley. Got there and we had to go to the top of the mountain for this ghost town. And they had this platform that you sat on that was on a rod that went up to a link up to this, I don't know what it was. But anyway, it was a chairlift taking you up to the mountain. Now, after my experience on that Ferris wheel, I'm really shocked that I got on that because it was like 30 feet above the ground when you were being taken up to the top. But we got up there and they had a gunfight, different things like as if it were an old Western town and there were people there, coming out of the saloon, standing 20 feet apart with a shootout, fast draw. We looked around the town and we watched the shootout, and George said, well, you think we should get some souvenirs or something? I said, yeah, there's a shop over there. Why don't we go over there and look? So we went in the souvenir shop. And I was looking around and I looked up and there was the prettiest girl I have ever seen. She was a Cherokee Indian, dressed in traditional Cherokee outfit. And I just couldn't take my eyes off of her. So I walked over to her and I said, introduced myself, said we were up here from South Carolina and curious if there was anything up here you could do it in the evening. And she brightened up and she said, "Yeah, we can go over to Gatlinburg." I said, "What's over in Gatlinburg?" She said, "This is a dry county. That's not a dry county. We can have a few beers and we can dance all night." I said, "That sounds great." So I said, "George, come here." And George came over. I said, "Do you think you could fix my friend up with one of your friends?" And she said, "Yeah, I can do that." And George's eyes lit up. Finally, he was going to get to take a girl out. He was all excited because if this girl that she was going to get for him was as beautiful as she was, he couldn't lose. So he was talking to her and getting really excited. And I said, "George, I think I better call home." He stopped and he looked at me. He said, "No, you don't." I said, "Yeah, I think I should call and let them know we're okay." He said, "No, don't do that." He said, "Don't you call home." I said, "George, I think I owe them that. I mean, it's their car." He said, "Ricky, you're going to screw this up. I know you're going to screw this up." I said, "No, I'm not. I'm just going to call home and let them know we're okay and that we'll be home in a couple of days." He said, "Don't do it. Don't do it, Ricky." He was adamant. "Don't do it, Ricky." And he looked at this girl and you could see the pain in his eyes. He said, "Don't do it. You're going to screw this up as sure as I'm standing here." I said, "No, I'm not. Come on, we're going to take these girls and we're going to have a good time. We're going to enjoy ourselves dancing and drinking with these beautiful women." He said, "No, you're going to screw it up." I said, "I'm going to go call." So I went to the phone booth. I called home. George was watching me, and my smile kind of got slimmer and slimmer. And I hung up. And he said, "Damn it, damn it, damn it, I knew it. I knew you were going to screw this up." I said, "Well, George, we have to go because my dad's in the hospital." He said, "You couldn't wait one more day, could you?" He wanted to hit me so hard. I had screwed up 3 acquaintances he was making already. And I said, "I guess I better go tell the girl that we can't take him over to Gatlinburg." And he said, "I knew it, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it. I knew you were going to screw this up." I walked over to the girl and I said, "I'm sorry, but we've got to go. My dad's in the hospital." And she said, "Okay," and turned around to another customer. It didn't matter to her one way or the other. But George was going, damn it, I knew you were going to screw up." That's all he could say. So we went and got in the car, and even in the car he was going, "I knew you were going to screw that up. It was just too good to be true," he said. "You had the most beautiful girl in the world just wanting to go out with you, and she was going to get me one too, and you just had to screw it up." We drove we drove for quite some time, and it was early in the morning. It wasn't late at night, it was early in the morning. Just too tired to drive, so I pulled over into one of the rest areas and we just locked up the car and fell asleep. We were just exhausted until we heard thump, thump, thump. Again, thump, thump, thump. And I looked up and it was a policeman knocking on my window. And I rolled down the window and I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You boys can't sleep here." I said, "We didn't mean to. We just stopped for a minute and he said, "You can't sleep here. You better find a motel if you want to sleep." I said, "Okay." Cranked it up and looked at the time and where we were, and I said, we can make it. We drove all the way back into Charleston. George still mumbling under his breath. Oh, and I dropped him off at his house, and I went up to the hospital. Dad was doing okay. He went home the next day. So I mean, he wasn't any real life threatening, but my mother told me he had a heart attack, and that, to me, heart attack back in those days, that was, oh my gosh. So that's why I wanted to go home. Every time George has seen me since that time, he always tells whoever we're with about this time that we were in North Carolina, or was it Tennessee? I don't know whether it's North Carolina or Tennessee now. That we had the chance to take two beautiful Cherokee Indian women out to dance and drink. And I screwed it up like I did with everything else. Poor old George. He never let me forget that. Never let me forget that. Man, that was one beautiful woman. I almost wish I hadn't called home, but I just felt like I owed it to my parents. We had been gone for 3 days. So, and then to find out my dad was in the hospital because he had a heart attack kind of frightened me. Anyway, that was my buddy George from high school. Recently passed away. We didn't, like I say, we didn't see each other much after high school, but we had some good times in high school. Another friend, gone. I have talked your ears off. Take care of yourselves. This smoke's okay, but it's not as good as the others I've had. I mean, some people probably love this, and I don't know. I'm not a cigar aficionado. I'm just going through these to see what I think. I'm beginning to think that when I'm finished with these, that might be it for a long time. Okay, folks. I will see you next time. God bless you. Until then, bye-bye.